So thank you for having me here. It's great to be back to the Netherlands, because I used to live actually in Leiden 10 years ago. I used to work for the European Space Agency. One of the biggest challenges to me as a Spanish speaker in the Netherlands wasn't actually to launch stuff into space, was actually to tell people where I used to live, which is Kabeljauwsteeg. So, can I just begin with a question to all of you? Do you feel like you own your identity online? If you feel like you don't own your identity online, please raise your hand. Right, so that's pretty much everyone in the audience here. What if I told you that there is a way that you can truly own your identity online? A fundamental building block that will allow you to not only own your identifier, but also prove who you are, authenticate yourself online, offline, and it's absolutely in your control. There's no central authority, it's a distributed network, so there's no censorship, there's no one can prevent you and take away that really, really valuable thing, which is your identity. So this is a bit of who we are. We're Yoti. You can look us up on the website, so I'm just gonna skip through this and get to the meat of this. So let me begin with a story. So Alice heard about this amazing digital, video platform that now serves interactive content and things like that. So she goes to this website, VideoFlix, and the first thing she sees is this, username and password. Okay, so Alice tries her username, Alice, just fill in a password 123456. Problem is that Alice is already taken by someone else, right? So Alice goes and then looks, okay, how else can I actually prove my identity online? Oh, I've got a Facebook account, great. So let's just go ahead and use that. So Alice goes and selects Facebook as her identity provider and then creates an account with VideoFlix. What Alice doesn't know is that, later on, next day, she starts being targeted by, some of the brilliant video platforms online, like, Video Prime and things like that, without Alice actually doesn't know where that comes from. So that's a bit of an issue. So if we take a step back, what's happening here? Alice is delegating her identity to one of these blue chip big identity providers. So she's pretty much like giving away control of that. Is putting these people, these organizations into a place where they can have access to a lot of information in terms of the digital footprint of Alice online, right? So they know the type of websites that Alice visits, and also whether she's got a bank account with a particular entity, or maybe she joined a particular group, which is not great in terms of privacy for Alice. So is there a better way? Is there a way where Alice doesn't have to, give away her privacy or give away control and delegate in all these, blue chip organizations? So if you have a look at what's really happening here, because even to create your Facebook account or your Google account, you start with an identifier, right? So if you think about identifiers, one of them could be your name, right, Paco. The problem is that that's not a global and unique identifier. Nobody owns that. In fact, there are so many Pacos in the world that it's impossible to get an account in any of these very well-known online services. So you go next to an email address, right? You've got a kind of a similar issue with very well-known email providers. It's global, it's unique, but the problem is, and the question is, do you really own that identifier? Or does someone else own it? So you can think of who owns that identifier as a hierarchy, where you're actually at the very bottom of that hierarchy yourself. Actually, the email provider owns that identifier. But is it the top of the hierarchy? No, actually the company that provides that service owns that identifier. There's even higher layers in terms of that hierarchy, in terms of the top level domain, and eventually at the top of the hierarchy is the root DNS service. So there are 13 root DNS servers in the world. They're all controlled by pretty much the US government, and actually the Department of Commerce is in control of who are these top-level domains and who is authorized to basically register them as DNS entries. If you take a very useful identifier, which is also global and unique, your phone number, you can think about, okay, so I think I know my phone number, but actually you don't. Your phone operator does, right? And we've seen cases actually in the cryptocurrency space where wallet has been stolen because SIM swapping processes where you basically go to the phone operator with a fake ID and say, yeah, actually I own that phone number, please give me a SIM copy of that. It's a bit of an issue. On top of that is also the national regulator. Yeah, so in the case of UK, that's Ofcom. In the Netherlands is the Dutch Telecom Agency. So is there a way to have an identifier that you truly own, that there is no central authority that says, okay, you own that identifier, but happens in a distributed way with a consensus that agrees on that identifier belongs to you and is bound cryptographically to that particular entity? So this is a fundamental concept that came up about 3 years ago. It was a piece of work sponsored by the Department of Homeland Security, actually. But the concept is that you create this distributed identifier that nobody owns. It's a string that represents the ID, then the method, and that's particular and specific to a blockchain system, right? So the method could be, for example, on Ethereum blockchain, it could be on the Bitcoin blockchain, it could be on the Sovereign blockchain, or even the Libre blockchain, which is a project that we have in Jyoti. After that, you've got that particular sequence of strings that represents that identifier. And then one of the fundamental components of your DID, it's a key pair, right? So you publish the public key of that key pair, but you actually keep that private key safe, secure in an identity wallet or a place that you actually trust that is going to keep that private key in a secure space. So, for example, at Jyoti, we provide access to the secure elements so you can store that private cryptographic material secure. But it's your choice, right? So you could actually print a QR code with a private key, put it in a safe, or under the pillow if you want. It's absolutely your choice. The standard doesn't dictate where you have to store that private key. And then the second element is the service endpoint. So, okay, I've got an identifier, but this is basically answering the question of how do I reach you? So if you're in control of that private key, you are pretty much authorized to update the service endpoint without having anyone or intermediate person or central authority to doing that for yourself, like is happening today with the DNS systems or registrars. So you're in absolute control to update that, and you don't depend on anyone. This is how a DID looks like, according to the W3C draft standard. You can see in green highlighted the 3 elements that I've discussed, but also in yellow, something which is important for consumer identity and also for organizations which are a bit kind of smaller, medium, and don't have perhaps a very strong public key infrastructure in place. So that recovery method allows you to recover your DID. Yeah? Because one of the big benefits of DIDs is that there is continuity. So even if you lose your private key, you can delegate recovery to a particular entity, agency, or if you don't trust just one, you can actually set a quorum. Say, for example, 2 out of 3 of these trusted agencies need to be basically authorize that recovery of that DID. DIDs are interoperable, so there's no point of Jyoti coming up with one DID method or Sovereign or someone else. Actually, the standard allows you to integrate across different blockchain systems, right? So this is a project by the Distributed Identity Foundation called the Universal Resolver. So that allows you to provide a DID, and then that looks into the method, in this case Sovereign, but that could be, again, Ethereum, Bitcoin, or Libre, and that will allow you to resolve the service endpoint, the public keys, so you can actually interact with that particular DID. So how does the use case look like now with Alice? registering her account in VideoFlix. So instead of picking up a username or password or delegating to a third-party identity provider, she provides her DID. Okay, Alice she's not capable of memorizing this, but the identity wallets and the libraries basically, they move away all this complexity. So for her, the only thing that she will see is that's her VideoFlix DID. Yeah, so this kind of pet name that represents that DID. Think about it like your agenda on your phone. You don't know the phone numbers from all your contacts, but you basically give them names that you actually understand and have meaning for that. And then the way it works is that VideoFlix doesn't have to contact the identity provider, goes and resolve that particular DID on that particular blockchain, and then brings back the public key and the authentication service endpoint. So the next step for VideoFlix is basically to push a challenge to that authentication service endpoint, and because Alice is in control of the private key, she can sign that challenge and then authenticate herself in the VideoFlix platform with no intermediates or central authorities involved. But what happens when Alice loses her phone, right? It's a question that we found out very quickly at Jyoti when we started to work on digital identity. Like, you could have all these great cryptographic-driven digital identities, but in reality, people lose their phone, organizations lose access to private keys, so how can she recover? So if you remember the recovery endpoint, basically she can instruct her recovery agency to recover that DID and assign a new public key, in this case, this purple public key for her particular DID. So what happens is that when VideoFlix goes to the blockchain and resolve that particular DID, they get not only block n, but also block n+1, and they will see that the purple public key is the one that is actually on the head of that particular blockchain and the one that is authorized to basically authenticate that particular DID. So the process is pretty much the same, but the blockchain is retrieving that purple public key instead of the green one, and then Alice is really happy because she can continue to watch her favorite TV series on VideoFlix. But all these DIDs is great, like it gives you all this sovereignty in terms of you really control those identifiers, you don't depend on any central authority, but identity is way bigger than that. Yeah? For identity, you actually need to provide context, you need to provide statements. We call these verifiable claims, which is a very simple definition because it's just a statement that you can verify cryptographically, right? You can think about your passport today, or driver's license, even tickets or memberships to particular organizations, even particular attributes that define that person, like maybe +18 attribute, yeah, that can be issued as a verifiable claim, and that can be disclosed without giving away your full date of birth. Yeah? So how can you also use verifiable claims in such a system without compromising on privacy? Because today you could give a certificate to someone, yeah, and then if you want to prove your identity, you have to give all of the information in that certificate, like today happens with your passport, driver's license, and things like that. In this example here, we've got 4 particular issues, so a bank, government, an employer, and an email provider. So imagine that Alice has been watching too much VideoFlix, and now it's time to get a job. So she's got a government ID, bank ID, and an email provider. But the way that she interacts with these particular issuers is leveraging on everything that we talked about DIDs. So she generates these private keys, yeah, and publishes these public keys and creates those 4 different DIDs. So A, B, C, and D, they're pretty much independent from the issuer perspective. So what she does is that she provides those DIDs to the different issues, and that way she manages to have achieve privacy, so the bank doesn't know that that's her digital identity or persona, for example, for that government or that employer or email provider. So what happens is that Alice starts collecting these verifiable claims and keeping them in her secure identity container. So that's something that she doesn't publish onto the blockchain, she doesn't give away to people only she decides to disclose attributes of those verifiable claims as she needs to, right? So the way it works is that she may be taking her nationality coming from the government as an issue, because that's important to prove that she's Dutch when she wants to find a job somewhere in Europe. She can get also the bank account number coming from the bank, yeah, because she wants to get paid, and also an email provider, so the employer can also contact her. So she produces this zero knowledge proof disclosure that takes all these different attributes and provide proof to her employer that these are her identity attributes and they come from all these different issues, and the employer can verify that with cryptography. Yeah, it doesn't need to trust a particular entity, but basically goes to a blockchain, resolves the public key of the issuers, and can verify that cryptographically. And the analyst basically can reuse and produce new proof of disclosure as she sees fit, and have to disclose elements of attribute with other service providers. So we're talking about DIDs, which is the pretty much gives you this interoperability layer, allows you to have the fundamental building block, which is your distributed identifier. Then you've got these verifiable claims, which is basically extending that and giving a meaning, context, a way to basically prove generic statements of that particular person. But everything we talked until now is connected to private keys, yeah? And there's nothing stopping me from basically sharing that and colluding with someone and giving my private key to someone else. So that's where the third level, which is biometrics, come into place. Yeah? Biometrics actually link private keys and verifiable claims to individuals. Yeah? So that's really important, because when I want to prove, for example, that I'm over 18 because I want to buy a bottle of wine, the system should prevent me from sharing that with my smaller brother, yeah, and him basically going and get some bottle of wine from the supermarket. At Yoti, we've developed all these different technologies in terms of facial recognition, speaker identification, that will allow companies, startups to build concepts around how you prove your identity with multi-factor and multimodal biometrics. And if you allow me just one piece of advice for the hackathon, please don't write biometrics onto the blockchain. Yeah, don't do that. If you're going to do that, come and talk to me. Or if you want to know anything more about our Libre ID or biometric platform, happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paco.